Hey, this is Max and I'm here to tell you about the all-new Magic Bullet looks. In this new Magic Bullet looks, we have added 2 new creative tools to emulate real-world effects and 1 technology preview to support ACES workflow through OpenColorIO. Now in this video, I'll talk to you a little bit about the support of ACES workflow through OpenColorIO. Using ACES, we can accurately transform what the camera saw into what our display can reproduce without having to guess. ACES is a systematic approach to preserve the perceptual accuracy of our images as it moves through 1 or more imaging systems. Now imagine as we shot an image with our camera and view it on a certain display, we have already gone through the minimum of 2 imaging systems, which interprets lights and colors differently than our eyes do. Now using ACES to transform from what the camera saw into what the display can reproduce efficiently eliminates guesswork and allow us to focus more on the fun stuff, that is providing creative grade to our images without having to worry about the correct technical transformations, since it is now handled accurately by ACES. Prior to ACES, making our image to match what we saw on the day we shot must be done by tweaking some color correction controls like the lift, gamma, and gain. Today, simply by using ACES transformations, we can display our image as accurately as possible. And this doesn't have to be complicated, because using ACES transformations is as easy as selecting options from the drop-down menu. Now with this implementations of ACES support through OpenColorIO, you can now finally work in ACES framework in NLE software such as Adobe Premiere Pro directly on your editing timeline. Now, it is important to understand that this implementations of ACES support through OpenColorIO is still on its early phase and can be considered as technology preview. We are sharing it on its early state in the hopes of guiding our users along with us on the journey and getting important feedbacks along the way as we go. So, we're now in Premiere Pro and let's apply looks and hit Edit Looks button to launch Magic Bullet Looks. So the first thing that I want you to know about Magic Bullet Looks is this tool chain right under your image preview where you can drag and drop your tools into. Now before starting to play around with the collections of fun tools that come with looks, let me draw your attentions into this input and output fields. In these versions of looks, selecting input will automatically select the output as well and open a color management panel. In this color management panel, this is where the fun begins, and this is where you can then select the way you want to work. Now let's focus into this mode options, and by default it is set to 1D color handling. And the idea behind 1D color handling is that it allows the user to use 1D lookup table to map the tone curve of our clip. However, the color primaries of the clip will remain in its original source color space. So all the adjustment inside looks will then be carried out in the linear floating points. So as you see, we got a correct contrast level, but we do need to tweak the saturations. So in simpler term, the 1D color handling will help you to get correct amount of contrast of your image, and you will not clip any informations because all the adjustment done inside looks will be done in linear floating points. The only thing that you need to consider with this approach is that you still have to worry about the color space technical transformations, and this can be done by either tweaking the saturation control, or if you want something more accurate, you can use the technical LUT. We can do that by using the LUT tool inside Magic Bullet Looks. And in this clip, I happen to know that the clip is coming from red camera, so I'll use red white gamut log 3G10 to Rec 709 LUT. I also will need to change the LUT gamma to RWG log 3G10 to get an accurate transformations. Now this 1D color handling was chosen as the way of working in looks to prevent potential issue when transforming color primaries from one color space to the other. Thus the naming of color handling and not color management. So for instance, if you're working with clip that is already in the video level, by default, look setting in the input and output have already accommodates that, and you can then simply browse and select any looks from the presets and carry on to the next clip. When you have log clip, however, you'll need to specify the type of log file you're working with in the input. And you can either output your clip to video level like Rec 709 or sRGB, or even reroute your output back to the same log type while previewing it as sRGB. Now, using 1D color handling can be fast and easy way to work, but if you need technical accuracy, it can still let you down. But now, it's not the case anymore since looks now support ACES through OpenColorIO. Now, to use ACES, simply choose OpenColorIO-ACES from the mode dropdown. Now, on the input field, you can specify what type of log clip you're working with. Since we are working with log C material, I can select input, ARRI log C with exposure index of 800. I can now set my output to output Rec 709 if I want to output my clip to video level, or I can set it back to input, ARRI log C, to have my clip back as log C, but with looks adjustment inside it without clipping any informations, of course. This is particularly useful, and we'll talk about this later when we deal with more complex workflow. If you notice, we also have the option to preview our clip. We can preview it on sRGB or Rec 709 or however you want it. Remember that this is only a preview, and your output selections will determine what type of file you are outputting your clip as. So let's now switch the output back to Rec 709. I can now start throwing tools into my tool chain to get the look I am going for. And when I'm done, I can hit confirm to confirm the look. So doing so, I am now accurately mapping my log file to what my display can reproduce through ACES. Meanwhile, I also did some creative adjustment that was done inside ACES. Now, if you happen to work frequently with the same type of input and the same type of output, you can save it as a preset. And to do so, simply go to the preset drop-down and select Save As. Later on, instead of setting the input and output manually, you can now save some seconds just by using the presets that you have created. Now that we know ACES accurately transform our images to what our display can reproduce, what if we are solely working with imagery that is already in the display space, such as Rec 709 or sRGB materials? Can we still use ACES, and does it make sense? And the answer is yes, and it does make a lot of sense. Here I have a Rec 709 image, and we can select OpenColorIO-ACES from the mode and set the input to output Rec 709 and set the output to be same as input. Now, what happened in the background is that ACES will strip off all the color signs of the image and correctly map it to the big ACES color space. And here we can benefit by having photographically more accurate behavior when dealing with this image. So for example, if I set the input and output back to sRGB and use the 1D color handling, a normal exposure adjustment will look like this in the image. It's rather inaccurate and not very interesting, right? So now if I bring this image back into ACES using the OpenColorIO and set the correct input and output and perform the same exposure adjustment, you can really see that the same exposure adjustment looked much more interesting and much more realistic. Well, okay, now the most important question is, if I'm already using a color managed workflow for my color grading project, can I still use Magic Bullet Looks? And the simple answer is yes, of course. Let me show you how to use Magic Bullet Looks inside DaVinci Resolve in an ACES color managed workflow. So here we are in DaVinci Resolve 17, and let's go to Settings, and in the Color Management tab, I'll set my project to ACES CCT and my output to Rec 709. Since I am mostly working with clips coming from ARRI log C, I will need to set my IDT to ARRI log C as well. So now by having the color management set, all the color adjustment that I will be doing in the color page will be then carried out in ACES CCT. Now, if I want to apply Magic Bullet Looks anywhere in the node editor, I need to make sure that Looks will have to recognize that the clips is now in ACES CCT and it will have to return the clip back to ACES CCT as well. So let's apply looks in this node and hit Edit Looks button to launch Magic Bullet Looks. Now, when I select Input, in the Color Management tab, I'll use OpenColorIO ACES, and as my input, I'll use ACES CCT, and for my output, I can select Same as Input, and I will be previewing it in Rec 709. So now by having this set up, all my adjustment inside Magic Bullet Looks will now be carried out in ACES CCT, and then it will be returned back to ACES CCT. I can also be sure that my preview will be technically correct because ACES is handling the technical transformations. So if we are going to compare the preview inside Magic Bullet Looks to the viewer in Resolve, we will get a 1-to-1 match. So to summarize what we've been doing, we are using Magic Bullet Looks for our creative adjustment done in ACES CCT and trust ACES framework that was set on Resolve project settings to carry out the technical transformations. This approach allows us to focus on the fun stuff and let ACES to do the technical conversions accurately. So, I hope this video provides you with some insights of how you can use the new color management feature inside Magic Bullet Looks. I am very excited about Magic Bullet Looks and what you will do with these new features. And this is Max from Maxon. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye.